I'm Robert Cujo Teschner. I'm the founder and CEO of V.Max Group, a national leadership and teamwork training company based out of St. Louis, Missouri. And what I do is I work to help teams become their absolute very best. Today on the podcast, we're going to talk about the impact that the movie Top Gun made in my life, a movie that ensured that I would not become a classical violin player professionally, but rather an Air Force fighter pilot. We're going to talk about the 4 F's, the simplest way to drive meaningful accountability in any organizational setting. We're also going to talk about the importance of stripping away ego and why all leaders need to be able to do so in order to be able to bring the best out of their teammates. And we're going to end with the notion that accountability has nothing to do with punishment. That's what we're talking about today.
Welcome back to part 2 of our delicious conversation with Rob Cujo Teschner, and he is a veteran of operations, Northern and Southern Watch over Iraq. He is a former F-15 Eagle. Wow, I have a problem with that one. And he's a former F-22 Raptor fighter squadron commander. And on top of all that, he is the founder and principal at V.Max Group, a leadership and teamwork training company. And he is the author of a new best-selling book, which is Debrief to Win. And we're going to talk more about that. Now, we were talking about the 4 F's for debriefing. We've talked about in part 1 about how maybe we have, in many ways, we have accountability upside down, back to front, and it doesn't necessarily make people want to be part of it. And, you know, Cujo laid out these beautiful 4 F's of how we can use accountability in a very powerful and positive way that makes people want to embrace it. One of the things that, for me, as you know, if you've been a listener for this show for any point in time, you know, I ask personal questions. I believe in the power of vulnerability because I know that that is what bonds us all. So in the ilk of vulnerability, you have this name, which is Rob, your own name, Robert, and then the nickname Cujo. And if you're a podcast listener and you've listened to any podcast with somebody who's from particularly these kinds of military backgrounds, they usually have a nickname. Many of my mates have got them. I've got lots of mates who've served. They've all got these weird and wonderful nicknames, and it's always an interesting thing to find out where that name comes from. So we're going to ask Rob Cujo Teschner, where did you get Cujo from? Because we talked about right at the beginning of the first show, we talked about how you were influenced by Top Gun, the movie, and there is a movie called Cujo, and Cujo was a lunatic, crazy dog. So is that you?
Great question, Dov. Okay, so let's talk about fighter squadron rituals, Air Force fighter squadron rituals that come into play post-Vietnam War, prior to Desert Storm. One of those is the naming ritual. Yeah. And if I were to kind of just summarize the evolution of a fighter pilot, you know, you get your commission, however that might be. Mine came from the Air Force Academy. And then you go through your training before you show up at your first operational squadron. It turns out you spend another couple of years as a student after you graduate from university. So 13 months to learn how to take off, land, fly from point A to point B, fly close formation on another airplane 3 feet away. That's undergraduate pilot training. Then everybody in the class kind of disperses. Helicopter pilots go to helicopter school, tanker transport to their schools, whatever. Fighter pilots go to a 3-month-long course to learn how to abuse an airplane, because we're going to now learn to use an airplane as an instrument of war. So it's a different kind of flight requirement there. And if you can successfully complete that program, you learn how to fly whatever your first major weapon system is going to be. In my case, it was a 6-month-long process to learn how to fly the F-15 Eagle. So that's about.
So you're learning to use and abuse this.
That's right.
That in and of itself is fascinating. I'm sure there's a whole hour we could do on the understanding of abusing something to its best outcome.
That's right. You're going to push an airplane to its design limits, sometimes just a skosh beyond that, because it's about kill or be killed. It's about trying to optimize where you are in relationship to a threat, that has ambitions that are nefarious against you. And so it's a totally different flight dynamic.
Yeah, I'm sure.
which makes the whole process that much more interesting. And it says that it's a totally different ball game than what it is that you learned in pilot training. So
I'm sure.
it takes a while to evolve into that.
Mm-hmm.
When you show up at your first fighter squadron, you're thinking, oh, now I've arrived. I have all of this great gouge, all this outstanding training. Surely my teammates are excited to have me on board, right? And you knock on the door, and I would summarize the first couple of days in a fighter squadron as basically being this. I showed up in the 58th Fighter Squadron at Eglin Air Force Base, Fort Walton Beach, Florida, all the way back in 1998, I believe it was. And somebody basically said, hey, we've got a new guy. Hey, welcome, new guy. And they gave me a temporary call sign of FNG3, frickin' new guy 3. All right, there was 2 new guys that showed up ahead of me. So I was affectionately known as FNG. Yeah.
That's fabulous.
And,
that sounds very official. What does this stand for? Frickin' new guy.
Yeah, frickin' new guy. And my job, my only real job in life in those early days in the 58th was to shut up and learn. Like I was told, you don't really have a voice right now. You're a student. You're laser focused on learning as fast as you can to be as good as you can be. And it's going to take you a while. And so this notion that I've arrived was false. I recognized that I still had much more to learn. And so I dedicated myself to that. And so I sort of got into this rhythm of just doing, bouncing back from mistake after mistake after mistake. And then one day somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, FNG, make sure that you're at roll call on Friday night. And roll call is another ritual that we have in a fighter squadron. It takes place every Friday afternoon. It's a very special place. It's one where we tell stories. It's one where we celebrate. We celebrate another week, that has been successfully executed in a really demanding environment. We've got all kinds of little traditions that we do there. But one of the things that we've adopted, again, post-Vietnam, was the naming ritual.
Mm-hmm.
And what it basically boils down to, Dov, is this. We've assessed whether or not a new guy like me is willing to align our values and belief systems with that of our new tribe.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are we willing to get on board with how this particular team does business? And if the answer is generally yes, we say welcome. And part of that welcome is we're going to tell stories about you. They told stories about me that night. The threshold for truth of the stories that were told, they had to be at least 10% true. So you can imagine what that was like. But if you can keep your mouth shut the entire time.
Oh, you do? You're not allowed to say anything.
You don't push back. You don't push back. You don't influence. If you can shut up nicely, you walk out of there as Cujo. If you try to influence, it's not gonna go so well for you. But here's the takeaway from all of that, because it can seem like a juvenile process to some. On Monday, when I came into work, my locker had Cujo on the side of it, and that small signal from my teammates that they had fully embraced me meant something to me. And it wasn't but a couple of days later until somebody said, hey, Cujo, what do you think about this? And I realized I had a voice. And it was a very, very significant moment for me as a young lieutenant in a place that I had long wanted to arrive at, that said that I've made it, and now I've earned the respect of my teammates, and they in turn respect me enough to welcome me into their fold. And it built bonds that are unbreakable. I mean, to this day, I still refer to myself as Cujo from that naming ceremony a million years ago. And that's how my wife refers to me when we're talking with fellow fighter pilots. And that's how I'll be known until the day that I die. My kids call me Cujo when they're talking about me to others. It's pretty strong ethic there. But what's more important is that as we study how it is that an organization learns to become accountable, how an organization learns to optimize the human side of the team and really get the most out of the individual members of the team, I found in writing my book, Debrief to Win, reverse engineering how come a fighter squadron does all of this so well, that we have high degree of what's known as psychological safety, which is an environment of rewarded vulnerability, according to Dr. Timothy Clark, which says we can admit to mistakes and weaknesses in front of each other. It's not only accepted, it's the expectation. And what are we doing in a debrief, Dov? What are we unearthing in a debrief? We're unearthing our mistakes and our weaknesses. We're doing so in a positive, forward-focused way, but we've got to have a culture that enables all of that. And, so writing Debrief to Win, I started studying fields that I knew nothing about. I started studying this notion of psychological safety, which I had never heard about before. And I started to dig into vulnerability, which I was aware of generally, but I would have told you I've never been vulnerable before. And, you know, I would look down on peers that were that way. And then I realized the people that I looked up to were the most vulnerable. And the folks who were the most successful were those who were willing to step up and say, I screwed this up. I take full ownership of it. Here's what I'm going to do differently. And they could do it with a smile on their face, saying that they were comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Clark's got 4 stages of psychological safety. Okay. Dr. Timothy Clark, he's written a book called The 4 Stages of. The first stage is inclusion. The second stage was where it's safe for us to learn. The third stage is where it's safe for us to contribute. The fourth stage is where it's safe for us to challenge the status quo, all without fear of any sort of negative ramifications. Long-winded answer to your question about why Cujo, but if you think about this, when I was welcomed into the fold on day 1 and I was told your new name is FNG3, I was actually included that day by my social collective. When I was told shut up and learn, I was told it's safe for me to learn. That means make mistakes. 6 months into the future, when I'm formally named Cujo, I was fully included, and somebody asks me week number 1, what do you think? It was safe for me to contribute. And eventually when I became an instructor pilot, it was expected that I challenge the status quo, because we're always looking to up our game. The enemy's always getting stronger. So we've got to figure out how we're going to adapt, right? And in that background research, I realized that a fighter squadron has tremendous psychological safety, which is a necessary underpinning of a culture of accountability, which is a nice little convergence of session 1 and this one.
Yeah, and I agree with you fully. There is no real, I mean, this is the work I do too. There's no real team without vulnerability. It doesn't happen because people will break bonds very fast without vulnerability. And vulnerability is the foundation of all loyalty. Do you know why they chose Cujo?
I do. One of the contracts we have in an F-15 squadron is we can't share the stories that were told at our naming ceremony. So
really?
I'll have to leave that one on the table for now, but you can draw your own conclusions. I'd say I'm more of a Benji these days. Frank,
but you used to be a bit of a mad dog. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Okay, that's cool. That's very interesting. Yeah, because I know that happens. That's really cool. So, you know, it's interesting to me because, you know, as we talk about this at a team level, the interesting piece is because of my background in Jungian psychology and tribal mentality and what it is and how we bond in tribes. So much of what you've described there fits into Jungian tribal. So we're trying to be part of the tribe, but there is a way. It's very interesting to me, this, and I'd not heard that before, by the way. So thank you for that. This idea of you came out of the academy, you thought, okay, I'm all that in a bag of chips. And then you discover, yeah, shut up and learn, right? And that deflating of your ego, which happens in all the evolutionary cycles of tribe. So in a tribe, you usually you come to a point where you feel like you're all that. It's your ego. And then there is a dismantling of that ego where you're made into the feeling of nothing in order to rebuild you with your ego displaced, not removed because you can't remove it, but pushed to the side, and your values or the collective values are put in fore rather than in the background. So it's pretty cool that you're able to show us that and how that was done as a system. So now let's take that and translate that into where you've gone with your new book and sort of lay that out a little bit for us, because I know that this is part of how it all ties together. So talk to us a little bit about the new book and what are the main messages in there?
Yeah, so the new book, thank you, Dov, by the way, for that, as well as for the exploration there. I mean, I'm just as interested as you are in how that human team comes together, how the tribe works, I was blessed to be part of a really, really unique tribe, and I would just lump all the fighter squadrons into one as a fighter squadron, just sort of tribe writ large. I'll always represent it. And when I wrote the first book, Debrief to Win, it was sort of testing the thesis that we can reverse engineer what worked in that tribe and we can apply it into different. We can take from that team and we can use it in different. And maybe it's business teams, maybe it's other teams.
Sure.
And that exploration has proven to be correct. It's given us a lot of fruit. And so why stop with accountability? And there's so much more yet to mine from that background, which is what led to the writing of the second book, An American Fighter Pilot, Lessons Learned Beyond Mach 1, which is not about fighter pilots so much as it's about the different stories and experiences that I was privileged to experience during 20 years in that kind of a world, trying to translate them into what can we do with this? How can we take that and apply that to where it means the most to us, whether it's the business teams that we're privileged to lead, whether it's other teams that we're on, to include the family team that can definitely benefit from cross application of core principles that are domain agnostic. And so that's where we're going with that one.
So sort of, I just like you to sort of, if you can, to strip a little bit of, because both books, right? I want people to find out about both books. Strip a little bit out of both into, you know, a person, our listener is a leader. They are likely at a high level of leadership. They're leading, you know, if you had to do sort of a Cole's notes and say, okay, listen, dude, you gotta do this in from book one, and you got to do this from book two, and you got to bring those two things together to make it come together for you. Where would you go?
Yeah, I'd break it down to its foundations. You know, what's a mission in your world beyond the obvious? I mean, too often it's a project. Too often it's winning a book of business, and we kind of frame success as to whether or not we did that, what the numbers are in association with that. I think we waste a lot of time in that kind of a world, and I also think we leave a lot on the table. And so I advocate that every day is its own separate mission, and we ought to figure out what it's going to take for us to win that day. You know, how do we define success for the day? What are the objectives that we're setting for ourselves that are measurable, achievable, and time constrained for that day, so that we can build a plan to achieve it, so that at the end of the day, we can take time to assess what was the good that took place here? What can we learn from today to make meaningful progress to have a better day tomorrow? I was interestingly, it was maybe it was within the last year, Dov, I was reading James Clear's 3-2-1 Thursday notes, and he had a passage from Anne Frank in there, and the quote was essentially that, you know, wouldn't it be neat if every day, every man and every woman would assess the day, both the good and the bad of that day, to figure out what they could take away to make tomorrow better. I thought what a powerful reflection from a young woman in a horrible circumstance that we can apply to ourselves. And if we're going to take and we're going to make use of this, we have to acknowledge that if we've set, you know, a way to measure success for the day, we may routinely not achieve it. How do we deal with that? Do we see that as a failure? Do we see that as an opportunity? How much does ego or pride get in the way of us making meaningful progress? If we can start to work on ourselves day in and day out, consciously taking time to figure out how we can improve at the things that we think are most meaningful, we can test that, we can prove it to ourselves, and then we can scale it. We can then take that to whatever team it is that we want to. But it's this understanding that we're always going to learn from the experiences that are now in the past to help make the future better. That is the foundation of Debrief to Win, foundation of an American Fighter Pilot, foundation of everything that we teach. And it's unbridled optimism about the fact that the future is so bright, if only we care to learn constantly.
So we're debriefing the day, looking back at it, okay, and we're saying, where were the wins? You know, what could we have done better? What did we learn, etc. Okay. What is the setup for, you know, because you're saying take the day as a mission. What's the setup there? What are we saying there?
Well, we're basically saying that we're taking micro slices at the bigger picture here, and we're taking them all the way down. You can take it multiple times during the day if you want to, but that micro that micro slice of the year being each individual day that allows us to take small chunks, make it manageable, small bites at this big elephant of constant improvement in a way that we can see profoundly. And here's an example of in my family, we aspire to becoming a high performance family team. It's one of the huge upsides of the cancer journey. And one of the reasons why I answered yesterday's question, or the last episode's question, the way that I did, that the family was the thing that keeps me charged always. In the mornings, when I'm driving my oldest to school, my oldest two 15 and 13-year-olds, I ask them the question, what does success look like for you today?
Right.
And they may come up with something that may not be meaningful enough. And so I might nudge them, I might coach them along a little bit. But at the end of the day, we come to an agreement of what success looks like. And we, from that, craft an objective or a series of objectives. And then they articulate to me the plan that they're going to use to achieve their objectives. Drop them off, say goodbye. At the end of the day, as we get together as a family, before we finish our family traditions, I'll ask them, all right, Michael, oldest, how did today look to you? Well, Dad, I didn't achieve my definition of success. You know, my objective was this. I didn't get there because I got hijacked by Xbox. I didn't have the discipline that I needed. You know, I spent 3.5 hours playing whatever. My way forward for tomorrow is no Xbox for me. And I'm going to dedicate more time so that I can accomplish what it was that I said I was going to do today, as well as achieve what it is that tomorrow has in store, so that I'm caught up.
So that is really quite fascinating. So they're starting out the day saying, okay, what would success look like today for me? What are the objectives? What am I trying to achieve today? And then accountability to that is at the evening, which is, did I reach that? Didn't I reach that? What's the celebration? What do I need to do different? And, you know, you do something in there, which we did with our children, which I think is extremely rare, which is, how are you going to hold you accountable? Not, here's how I'm going to punish you. I'm not here to punish you. That's not my job. That's your job to hold you accountable. And, you know, you said about your kids saying, well, I spent 3 hours with Xbox, tomorrow no Xbox. So, I mean, I think that, you know, I say this all the time, by the way. I believe that leadership is parenting.
Yes.
If you don't understand the psychology of that, it's very simple. The psychology of it is this: that as the leader, your people, your teams look at you as the authority figure. As a child, you look at your parent as the authority figure. They have all the power, and you have very little unless they give it to you. With good leadership, we give lots of power. With bad leadership, we punish. We have all the power. So parent and lead exactly the same way. There's no difference. And you've just illustrated that beautifully. So thank you.
No,
and
thank
it
you.
really compounds that point. And it's vitally important for us all to get that lead by example, not by telling, but by doing. And part of that is by empowering your people, whether your people are your kids or your team, to say, okay, how do you want to deal with that? Amen. What do you think? What do you think is the consequence of that?
And if I could offer a couple of follow-on observations.
Yeah.
The first that I'd offer is, you know, too often what I see, practically speaking, at the team level at organization X, is that we wait until a failed outcome to practice accountability. So
yeah,
hey, there's been some disaster. Now it's time for us to have a retrospective or a post-mortem or whatever we call it. We do it. We get to the root cause. We blame somebody for the gigantic failure. They'll feel horrible. All of us are kind of hanging our heads. We leave there and just hope that it doesn't happen again, and off we go. What I advocate for is something that Collins writes about in Good to Great, actually. He talks about pre-mortems en route to an outcome. I used to do this when I was flying. I would constantly ask myself in my single seat cockpit, by the way, if we had the debrief right now, would we give ourselves a thumbs up or a thumbs down? And if the answer was thumbs down, what decision can I make to get us on track right now, to get us back on track so that the final post-mission debrief is a win? Every day with the kiddos, this is an opportunity to do pre-debriefs en route to the ultimate outcome of who are you becoming? Like, who are you going to be when you show up in life, you know, you leave the nest here and you're doing your own things. And if we can instill within them the confidence, as well as the skill set that says I'm accountable for who it is that I'm going to be now, then they're not having to make major course corrects later. And their final debrief hopefully is one where they say, you know, thanks for the steer, and I'm pretty happy about where it is that I'm going. And the other thing that I'd offer by way of observation is this idea of applying these principles that I teach in a work environment at home isn't mine. It was my wife's. She's an accountant by trade. I met her halfway through my military career, no Air Force background. But when we started talking about the impact that positive forward-focused accountability can make in an organization, when she read Debrief to Win, she said to me, why don't we do this at home? And that was shocking. I think most listeners to this point might say, okay, former military guy is now taking military principles and as a disciplinarian, throwing them at his kids. No. That there's, as you mentioned, we're empowering our kiddos and telling them that they own the outcomes that they achieve. But this wasn't even my idea. This was Diane's, which I think is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, that's awesome. I remember being somewhere, my son had just done a performance, and this lady came over to my wife and I. We didn't know her, and she said, you know, I just want to congratulate you. And I'm like, we're sitting in the audience, and I'm like, for what? Like, I didn't know this woman. She goes, your son, he's such a wonderful young man. And I said, you're congratulating the wrong person. And she goes, what do you mean? I go, that's all him. He goes, but it's the way you brought him up. And I go, yep, but it's the way he is. It's got nothing to do with me. It's all on him. It's all on him. I take nothing. And it's because that was what I always indoctrinated with him. Like, you do shitty, it's going to fall on you, mate. You do magnificent, it's going to fall on you. I'm never going to take that spotlight away from you, even if the spotlight is showing you all the dark bits, or whether it's showing you in your magnificence. So you get to call that, you get to decide. And I love that you're doing that with your kids, because again, we need to do this at leadership across the board. As we're coming towards the end of the show, and I don't want to miss this, you know, one of the things about life, whether it's corporate life or personal life, it's filled with uncertainty. Like, nobody expected, well, that's not true, but very few people, certainly in the general sense, expected a pandemic. You know, everything turned on a dime. Companies that said we can never go remote went remote in 21 days. It was, you know, you had to do it. And I think that we've all, psychologically, we all have these silly ideas that it will be the way it is, and it never is. That's not how life works. Talk to us about dealing with uncertainty and chaos, particularly being this guy who comes from this world of, you know, well, here's my mission and here's what I'm doing. And then suddenly, oh, here's your diagnosis, dude. You're on your way out at a very young age. Talk to us about that. How did you confront that, and what was the process for you?
Wonderful. I appreciate you asking this question, Doug, because this is very, very important to everybody, because what I'm about to talk about is the thing that's most likely to hit everybody, and that is that uncertainty on the home side, the personal health side that comes out of nowhere and blindsides you. One of the things that I really admired about my teammates in a fighter squadron, one of the things that I benefited from learning from a young age in that disruptive environment, is that no mission goes the way that we plan. Like, the disruption is going to hit hot and heavy from the moment that we take off. Flight lead's not going to be able to raise her landing gear, and so they're out for the fight. Number three's radar is not going to work. And all of a sudden, this formation that had 8 is now down to 6. But we still have to get bombs on time, on target. We still have to find a way of getting there. So our ethic is the story just got better. Like, with every hit that we take in the sky, the story that we're going to be able to tell about our ability to achieve success against overwhelming odds just got that much more interesting. And indeed, we try to go out there and win. And so I woke up from my colonoscopy in downtown Stuttgart, Germany. I was 100% against doing this thing. I knew that this was a waste of my time. I was upset about all the colonoscopy prep. Didn't they know who I was? I was relatively young. I was bulletproof. And my doctor said, "I'm sorry to inform you, we found this gigantic tumor, and I believe it's been growing for a decade." And my wife, who's 6 months pregnant with our fourth child at the time, looks at me with tears in her eyes. And, we both think, "Oh no, do I have days or weeks or months left to live?" I mean, what's the prognosis here? And he didn't know. We had to wait for biopsies. And now we're adding a whole bunch of words to our lexicon. My wife and I went downstairs. I was starving, and so was she by virtue of the pregnancy. We had to eat something because I needed to, and so did she. Even on the heels of this thing, we were both ravenous. And we sat there. It was a gorgeous Sunday afternoon in downtown Stuttgart, which was something of a rarity. And I remember looking at her and I said, "Well, honey, here's what I'll tell you from the background. Our story just got better. It's not going to feel that way for a while, but our story just got better." And indeed, it absolutely did. Biggest takeaway from that whole disruption is it's going to hit. That it is. No plan goes according to plan. Execution is always about adapting what it was that we theorized or what our vision was to the reality of the world in which we live. And if I could do anything over again leading up to the colon cancer diagnosis, it would have been very simply to do what it is we're doing with our kids, to apply teamwork principles to the home domain, to start planning for other things besides just the operational missions, to have a game plan in place for personal health and wellness, to communicate regularly about how on track we are with achieving our health and wellness goals, and really organizing as a family team across the array of things that are interesting to us to allow us to be able to achieve mission success. As it was, I had a divide in my life. I saw work life as being one thing. I saw family life being another thing. Here I was teaching, the irony of irony, team principles. Over here, I really wasn't that focused on it. I just kind of thought that it would happen as it needed to. And that kind of bit me. And so the takeaway is, let's take and apply team principles all over. Why? The early symptoms that I had that happened a decade prior to diagnosis, I kept to myself. I never communicated to anybody. I thought, surely nothing bad's going to happen to me, and I don't have time to be sick. And I willed them to go away, and they went away, and they came back and haunted me a decade later. That's an interesting one to live with. But I go back to, and I would end on this note, the debrief is our opportunity to reflect on what's now done. It's water under the bridge to make tomorrow better. I'm still around. I'm blessed beyond measure to still be around. And the opportunity here is now to craft a family team that's as strong as any of the military high performance teams that I was on, so that we can achieve what we consider to be our definition of success consistently. And that's what we're marching out to do.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And I think that's a great place for us to finish, because you've heard me say, if you've listened to the show many times, there is no home life and work life. They don't exist as separate, for a simple reason is you don't have a head that you transplant every morning. It's just not real. So the reality of it is, as the Buddhists say, wherever you go, there you are. You take you with them, and trying to separate those things is silly. And so instead, embrace it and bring yourself into coherence with all those circumstances. Rob, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being with us. I hope that you'll stay with us to the end. But before we finish, I want to give you a chance to tell people where they can find the books, they can find out all about you and all of your resources.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dev. I admire what it is that you've built and what it is that you're doing. Thanks for including me on your journey. And for me, if you want to learn more about what it is that I do, vmaxgroupllc.com, VMAXGROUPLLC.com. The book's there. Everything that we do is there. And we're just going to continue to grow that as we go forward.
And we will, of course, post that on the show notes with any other links for you to get in touch with Rob. And you'll find them all there. So again, thank you to Rob Cujo Teschner, and to you, dear listener. Thank you for tuning in. And remember that you can hang out with other conscious leaders. You can chat about this episode or any past episodes you've been listening to, Facebook or LinkedIn groups. The truth is, it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your true capability. To find out how you can hire me Dov Baron is a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization. Simply go to dovbaron.com. That's dovbaron.com. Because unified actualized meaning is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you can turn accountability into a truly positive thing that your team want to be part of by making everything about the team and bringing up the game. Remember, whatever's going down, it's just going to make the story better. Don't believe me? Listen to Rob. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.